So, 1 John, we are beginning chapter 3. We've gotten our way through the first two chapters, looked at quite a bit already, and we are going to get into chapter number 3 today. And we're going to read the text first, and then we will get into the lesson. And we'll do it with noise as I turn the microphone. All right. 1 John chapter 3, beginning verse 1, it says, "Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore the world knoweth us not, because it knew him not. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself even as he is pure. Whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also," that's a hard word, "transgresseth also the law. For sin is the transgression of the law, and you know that he was manifested to take away our sins, and in him is no sin." So, these are the verses we're going to be covering today. Beginning right here, verse number 1. He begins sort of with a reflection on being the child of God. And you almost get this sense of a sort of outburst of, he says, "Behold what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us." Almost like he's overcome by it for a moment. And saying, guys, look at this. So behold these, look at it. Do you see the kind of love that the Father has given to us? And when it says what manner of love, this isn't really talking about the quantity of love. It's not like you just have a lot of love, but actually manner is the type, the kind. This would be like when Peter says, knowing that all these things will be dissolved, in 2 Peter, I think it's chapter 3, he says, what manner of persons ought ye to be? Same type of terminology. What kind? And he's saying, what kind of love does it take for the sovereign of the universe, who created all men, who created all things, and then was blasphemed by those things, and yet he still loves them, and dies for them, and saves them, and brings them into his family? What kind of love is that? Look at that. And remember, what did we see in chapter 2? Brethren, I'm not writing you a new commandment. But I'm writing you a new commandment, in that it's in a whole new context. What's the new context? It's the context that it was fulfilled in Christ, and what is the command? Love one another. And now John's saying, look at what that love looks like. It was fulfilled in him. Behold what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us. We should be called the sons of God. There is a special kind of love that God has for his children. I mean, we use love like this ourselves, right? So, I love steak. That's one kind of love. I love steak. And I love steak more, depending on where it's from. So, like, you have some steakhouses that's like, you say, medium, and it comes out blacker than death. But then sometimes you say, like, I want it this way, and they actually bring it out the way you like it. And I like that steak better than the steak that looks like it was left on the grill for 4.5 years. But I love steak, but that's not like how I love my wife. And what you have to understand is that there is a special, particular love that God has for his people. And that's what John's highlighting here. What manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, the ones who are the children of God. There is a special love that it takes for God to bring someone into his family. You are my child. Interestingly, we're really dealing here with the idea of adoption, right? Because we weren't born into God's family naturally in that sense. Now, depending on the analogy you want to use, sometimes this is it would depend on the text we're in, but I'm not going to take the time to go through all of this. But when you talk about the doctrine of adoption, like you see in Ephesians chapter 1, right, that we were predestined to the adoption of sons. What's interesting is natural-born children, in a sense, are not chosen, right? So, oh wow, that's a really short timer. I'm going to have to remember that. But natural-born children aren't chosen to some extent. The child is born, and that's what you get, you know? However, with adoption, that child is chosen. It's not just, hey, you're in God's family and God's got to put up with you. But more interesting, I think, is that in Greek adoption, which is the adoption these people would have been familiar with, is you could disown a natural-born child because you didn't choose him, in a sense. But you could not disown the adopted child because you chose him. That's on you. So it's interesting to me that the picture in this Greek context that's used is that of adoption. Now, I'm not saying this is the best evidence for eternal security, but like we saw last week, I think John hints at eternal security all the way through. I'm not saying these texts are intended to teach eternal security, but I think they kind of do at the same time, because the doctrine of adoption is all throughout. So the idea here of being the Son of God, and by the way, this word here, what it says, that we should be called the sons of God, this is the same word we saw earlier when we went to chapter 2. There's the word techna. That's the same word that we saw at the very beginning of chapter 2. We saw my little children, these things write unto you that ye sin not. It's this word, techna. And then the first time when we saw that list, right? So we saw fathers, young men, little children. But it starts with little children, then goes fathers, young men. And goes little children, fathers, young men. The first one we said was the same as chapter 2, verse 1. That's this word, techna. So John seems to use this word, techna, quite a bit to refer to his audience in his epistles, for lack of a better term. The people he's writing to seem to be this close relationship. But now he says that same my little children, this familial sort of loving term that he uses towards these fellow believers, probably his spiritual offspring, now he says, and that is what we are with God. We are his sons. We are his children, his little children. He is the Father who loves us and cares for us. It's the same thing. There's another use of it. These buttons are so small. It's one thing about this app is like, man, these buttons are so small. But it says, now are we the sons of God, same thing. And there's a different term, again, idea for the other use of little children, but it's interesting the way that John uses this same language. But he says, therefore, the world knoweth us not. How does this make sense? He says, behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. So we are the sons of God, therefore the world knoweth us not. What's the connection there? Because, I don't know about you, but my dad taught me that when you see the word therefore, you ask, what's therefore? Well, the word therefore is a word that actually our parents should probably be a little bit familiar with. And this is where I'm going to drag us to the other side of the screen. Excuse me, did I say therefore? I meant knoweth. But here we have the word knoweth, right? The word knoweth, anyone want to guess? Gnosko. Now, this is terrible handwriting, so don't think that this is normal, how you would do Greek. This is on the fly. Sorry, but we were a little rushed for the service because I didn't plan on a house burning down or whatever, a fire on the way that rerouted us. I'm not trying to make light of that, just, we're a little rushed on the production end of things today. But this is the word gnosko. Interestingly, you probably know where I'm going with this, right? You know where I'm going with this. This word comes from a word. Oh, hang on. No, we're starting that again. I can't have that. Gnosis. Anyone know what gnosis is? Knowledge. Anyone know who might base their theological views on this idea of a special knowledge, perhaps? A gnosis of sorts. A gnos.
Could it be the Gnostikians?
Gnostikians. Now, this is one of the ways where I could say, where I could see the argument that this might be going a bit far to say John is giving another swipe at Gnosticism, perhaps. But even if there was something about Gnosticism in here, because this is more or less just a novelty of the meaning of the word so far. But even if there's some sort of Gnostic thing in here, it doesn't explain why he says, therefore the world knoweth us not. What does he mean by they don't know us? Well, the word gnosis and the word gnosko, which is the verb form there, it has a lot of meanings to it. When it says the world knows us not, it doesn't just mean, it doesn't just have to mean, the word doesn't, what we call the semantic domain, the broad range of what the word can mean. It doesn't just include the idea of head understanding of facts. It could be. And John could be saying, hey, since we're in God's family, the world doesn't get us. That's a possible interpretation. But because we're in God's family, the world just really doesn't understand us. However, there's a usage of the term gnosko and the idea of gnosis that I think fits a lot better in the analogy John is using. Because what is John using here? He's using a relationship analogy. And the word gnosko has a relationship meaning to it. In fact, if you look in lexicons, this will definitely be in there. It's used this way in the Septuagint. It's used this way in some of the apocryphal books. I think one of them is Judith, I think, uses it this way. I have a lexicon looking at all the different sources that use it in just this way. But for example, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, where it says that Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore a son. Question for you. Did Adam simply have some head knowledge about his wife, and she conceived and bore a son? This is the adult Sunday school class. I think we can all answer no. That's not how it works. There was an intimacy in it. There's a relational sense of this knowledge. It's not always what the word means, but I'm saying here, I think that's what John's saying, because we have what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore, the world knoweth us not. In other words, we're talking about relationships here. The Father and us as sons, and because of that relationship, the world doesn't have that relationship with us. Us being with the Father, being sons of the Father, makes the relationship with the world a bit different. And it means we don't have that same intimate connection that we have with the Father like we do with the world. It's either you have that connection with the world or the Father. Remember what we saw in chapter 2. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So which one of these do you have that gnosko with? That closeness of relationship, that intimate knowledge? Is it the Father or is it the world? It's one or the other. Therefore, the world knoweth us not, because it knew him not. This I don't have handwriting for, thankfully. But when it says, because the world knew him not, this is in John chapter 1. Reminded me exactly of this text. It says that he came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe in his name. Which were born, notice we're still talking here about this familial connection. They were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. So the world didn't know him, they rejected him, and that's why did they reject us? We have that relationship with him. Therefore, we are following him in the same rejection. That's why Jesus said, don't be surprised if they come after you. The servant's not greater than the master. The world rejected me. They're going to reject you if you're one of my disciples. And by the way, you want more proof? This is John writing this book, because I've been doing this all throughout. Once again, we have John saying the same thing, but a little differently in both books. So either someone is a really good John impersonator, or perhaps this was John. I find one of those to be much more reasonable. Anyway, let's move on. We move then on to the resurrected form that John talks about here in verse 2. He says, Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So, we do not know exactly what it's going to be like. But we know it's going to be awesome. It's kind of what John's saying. We are the sons of God, and it doesn't yet appear what we shall be. So, interestingly enough, we don't really know what a resurrected body is going to be like. So a lot of things people say, basically you get the idea you're going to be a Marvel superhero pretty much when you get the resurrected body. Except for you're probably not going to have like Thor long hair. I'm not sure Thor's allowed to have it. I'm just going to throw this out there. Had a very sketchy Greek pagan beginning, so, or no, that was not Greek, that was Norse, that was the Vikings. But, people just run wild with what they're going to do when they get to heaven. And some of it is heavily dependent on what your resurrected body is like. Here's all we know about the resurrected body. We don't know. Except, Christ had one. Remember, Jesus is the firstborn from the dead. And you might be saying, wait, hang on a second. Before Jesus, there was plenty of people who came back from the dead. Jesus himself rose the funeral procession is there. Jesus raised again. Lazarus. So, how can he be the firstborn of the dead? There's other people who were born from the dead before Jesus. Except for, the real bummer for Lazarus? If I was Lazarus, and I'm walking out of the grave, one of the first thoughts going through my head is, I'm going to have to die again. I'm really glad to be alive. But I'm going to have to go through that twice now. Thanks. See, every person that was born from the dead, so to speak, before Christ, died again. Which means they were not resurrected. Not in the biblical sense of resurrection. A resurrected body doesn't die again. So we know that much about resurrection. Jesus is the first fruits, as I think it's 1 Corinthians 15 talks about, of the resurrection. We know we will be like him, which gives us some hints, right? Like apparently walls weren't a problem for him. They're all in the upper room there, and then all of a sudden Jesus is there. So apparently, whatever the resurrected body, perhaps there's something with walls, or the lack thereof, or, you can pretend there's no walls if you want to. Maybe that's part of the resurrected body. Apparently you can still eat, so heaven's going to be great for me. I'm looking forward to that. I still have my steak. I bet they cook it well in heaven. Not well done. That's two different. Those are polar opposites. Well and well done. Yes, properly. If they cook it well done, then you should have repented and placed your faith in Christ. But we can get some hints, right, as to what the resurrected body is going to be like. But for the most part, we have no idea. We just know that we'll be like him. Because Christ was the forerunner of our resurrection. He was the first fruits, the firstborn. And this is one of the things that I think we often miss, is just how much Christ identified with us in his humanity. Not only just taking on human flesh, which is humbling enough for the Almighty God to step into his creation, but also that he's resurrected in that same human form, and now eternally exists as the God-man. Jesus didn't go up to heaven and then throw away the flesh. It's not Christian theology. He is eternally the God-man, and the forerunner, the first fruits of our resurrection. It's pretty cool that the sovereign of the universe did that because of what manner he was. I think that's pretty interesting. But it says, that doesn't yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him. Why? For we shall see him as he is. Well, what does that mean? What is the connection? This is the question I had to ask quite a bit studying for this lesson. You might be able to figure out. What is the connection between this and what apparently comes from it? So, we're in the family of God, therefore the world doesn't know us. How are those connected? We don't know what we shall be, but we'll be like him because we will see him as he is. How does seeing him as he is, in and of itself, make us like him? Like, obviously God has the power to transform us, whatever, but how does just seeing him make us like him? Well, there's a few different things that people have suggested, and this is one of those. I'm not dogmatic here, but I have a particular way I lean. And if you want to be dogmatic, go for it. Dig into it. Get your own study, or ask Pastor because he probably has it figured out. But there's a few things people have suggested. Number one is that beholding the glory of God will, in and of itself, have some transformative power in resurrection. So we do see that when God's full glory is revealed, it has an effect on people, right? This is the Mount of Transfiguration. Or Moses, his face shone, right? Whenever God pulls the veil back just slightly on his unlimited almighty glory, it has an effect. This is why I say to people, clearly Christ set aside the divine prerogatives that he had. Not that he no longer had them, but he did not access them when they weren't in the will of the Father. You want proof? Jesus didn't glow when he walked into Jerusalem. But his glory was still his. He just did not access all of his divine prerogatives. It was the Father's will to do so. He's performing miracles and things of that nature. Even that he does through the power of the Holy Spirit. But, somewhat of an aside, we see that when God reveals his full glory, his full attributes, it has some effect. So, there are some people who say simply that revelation of God's ultimate glory changes us. That's one theory. There's another one that says that it is that we will behold the purity of God and inwardly be changed as a result. So not that there is some transforming power in and of itself that changes us to be like God in the glory, but rather that beholding God's glory changes us inwardly to see purity and things of that nature. Not totally sold on that one, but something that people suggest on this. Then there's one more, and it is that by seeing, we are talking about being with him, an abiding sight. So, when we talk about seeing him, we're not talking about I got that sight of God and poof. But rather that when we talk about we are going to see him. For example, if you say, hey, I'm going down to, say you have family in Florida. Because there are a lot more free than us. But anyway, say they're going down to Florida, and you have family there, and you say, I'm going to go see my family. You're not saying you're going to go and look at them and come back, right? That'd be kind of weird. Get off the plane. There he is. All right, say it. That's not what we mean, right? We mean I'm going to go be with them. So you could take the approach that when we say we're going to see him as he is, we're going to be dwelling with him. And everything that dwelling with him and abiding sight of him would entail. At first that sounded a bit far-flung, a stretch. I don't know. I'm combining idioms here. At first that seemed to be a bit of a stretch to me, but that's the one I lean towards here. Because that's the one that seems to make the most sense of what John is saying, is that we're talking about heaven not being something that's point action. We're talking about being in his family, being in his presence, being with him. And even when he was on earth, the disciples were known as people who had been with Christ and have showed. How much more when we are glorified with him in heaven? Will the being with him change us to be like him? I could be wrong. Disclaimer, I'm not dogmatic on this. This is the one I lean towards, but I'm not positive on it. So if you'd like to disagree with me, go for it. Not that you're just not allowed to any other time when I don't give you permission. But I'm not saying this as a, this is how you have to view this verse, but this is what I think makes the most sense here. And if you disagree, go do your own research and figure out where you stand and why. But don't just disagree because you think it's not funny. Anyway, so we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. One quick caveat here to avoid dipping directly into heresy. We are not going to have all the divine attributes of God. This is a heresy that Mormonism falls into, where you become a God. God himself used to be a man, and he went through the process and became like God. Became a God. Had his own planet and we're on. But he used to be a person on a different planet with his own God. We are not saying when we say that we'll be like him, that we are going to have omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. We're going to have the impassibility, immutability. We're not talking about the divine attributes of what makes God God. We're not talking about all the fullness of Godhead dwelling in us bodily. We're talking about the bodily, resurrected Christ. So there is a difference, okay? Don't fall off the cliff into heresy. Say, hey, I'm going to be able to just create ex nihilo like God did out of nothing. I can just speak everything into existence. That's not what we're talking about. That's heresy. Just know that, okay? That's not what the Bible is. So let's move on. Then we go on to the effect of the adoption, and is that, and every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. So here's the question here. What is, when John says, this hope? What is this hope? Because he says, everyone that hath this hope in him. The way I see it, I think there's a couple options. Either the hope is that we shall see him as he is. That could be one of the hopes. Or we could be talking about that we shall be like him. Could be one of the two, right? Because the last verse says we will be like him because we will see him as he is. And everyone who has this hope. Well, which one? Which is it? Actually, I think it's actually the whole verse. What is the hope? The hope is that we will be with him and we will be like him because we will see him as he is. That's the hope. The hope of eternity with God as his sons, glorifying him, glorified in our resurrected bodies, with him for eternity. That's the hope. So we're not talking about just shall see him as he is. It's not just that. That's part of the hope. But the hope is more broad than this. The hope is that of eternity and the hope of being within eternity with Christ. And of necessity, those who have that purify themselves. Purify himself even as he is pure. A couple things about this here. Number one, anyone want to take a guess at what tense we're talking about when we talk about people purifying? Present. We are talking about an ongoing action. That is horrendous. We're doing that again. It's still ugly, but it's better, right? So what's the significance here? The one who has this hope is continually, as a habit of life, purifying himself. This seems kind of consistent with what we've seen in the rest of 1 John, right? That the habit of those who truly know Christ, as a habit of life, walk according to his commands, walk in love of their brother, purify themselves. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, purify your hearts, ye double-minded. That's both Psalm 24 and I think James 2 or 3, something like that. So it's an ongoing thing. But what I think is really interesting that we have to continually come back, and this is something that, as I've studied for these lessons, the more I noticed how John does this, is John continually roots our purity and our holiness in his purity and his holiness. He says, every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. Our holiness is not just out there. The command is not to be holy. It's not holy. The command is to be ye holy, for I am holy. We are not just commanded arbitrarily to do good things. We are commanded to be holy because we serve a God who is holy. And this is again where I say that we have to be careful when we deal with this, with a lot of these issues, especially things like theodicy, the justification of the goodness of God, in light of the problem of evil. We have to be careful to understand that there is no blemish, no darkness, no spot, no sin, nothing in God. He is pure, he is holy, he is righteous, he is just, he is unspotted by sin. And his commands that he gives to us are not things he came up with as good ideas. They are a reflection of who he is. God's character is revealed in his commands. God says not to bear false witness, not to lie. Why? Because God is truth. So if you lie, you violate not just God's command, but you violate his character. Because he is truth. You just told not truth. This is why I have a feeling I'm going to lose everyone here. Stick with me. Have you heard the name Socrates before? Socrates, ancient philosopher. And I'm sure you've read all the writings of Socrates, because I have too. Because there are none. Socrates didn't write anything. Plato, however, is the one that wrote telling us about Socrates, and there's actually debate. Was Socrates actually a real guy, or did Plato make him up and just use it to sort of present stuff and not get killed for it? There's potential for both of those, actually. But I've listened to several lectures on some of the conversations Socrates has, and if you talk to philosophy students, or even philosophy grads, who have studied some of Socrates, and they want to go after Christianity, or they want to go after religion in general, theism, there's a line from Socrates that they are going to bring up quite often. And it's with one of his dialogues. It's in one of the dialogues he had. So Socrates was known for having a bunch of different dialogues. And he asked a question that was something like this. He said, are acts pious because the gods like them? Or do the gods like them because they are pious? In other words, if you're saying that morality comes from God, is it God likes it when you do good things? Is it good because God likes it? Or is it God likes it because it's good? This was Socrates' critique of theism in general. And here's the thing. For pagan religions, that makes a lot of sense. Because they're kind of arbitrary. And that's kind of the point Socrates was getting at, is that if you have the gods like it because it's good, well, then you have a standard above your God that determines what's good. But if it's good because your God's like it, now your God is just arbitrary. So what if you have an evil God? Does that mean good is evil? If your God delights in bad things, does that mean that suddenly now bad things are good? So this is the critique Socrates offering. Here's the problem. And this is one of the friends that Matt and I work with. He's a philosophy student, and he and I specifically talked about this conversation in Socrates, which these are what I talk about every day. I'm sure this is the conversations you have every day as well. But I said, here's the problem. That totally misses Christian belief about God. Because we don't believe that things are good because God commands them. We don't believe that command from God is what makes it good. It is a character of God thing. The problem is most people view morality like something that exists of itself. And then God, viewing that morality, says, do this. And when you do this morality thing, God is happy. That's not how it is. Morality does not exist on its own. Morality is simply a reflection of who God is. And if we understand it in that context, why does God, why is it pleasing to God when we do good things? Because that's who He is. It's not because He viewed you doing this morality thing that is a thing that exists apart from Him and was happy and decided He likes morality too, but rather it's who God is by nature. So when we say, even as He is pure, you have to understand the depth of what that means. That God is light and in Him is no darkness at all. That morality is not something that exists on its own. It is wholly a reflection of God. This is why when people say, oh, I'm a good person, and they list all these things, and you say, yeah, but that, and that are against God's law. That's not good. You say, but it looked really nice to the person I was doing it to. Yes, but it violated God's character. And are you going to run on your arbitrary system of what good and bad is? Because that's how we get slavery and the Holocaust. Or are we going to conform to an objective, unchanging standard that is a reflection of God's character? He is pure. That is where it's all rooted. Our command to be holy is not our command to conform to some standard that exists that makes God happy. It is our command to conform to Him Himself. To conform to Christ. That's being holy. That's living righteously. I was not supposed to take that one. Let's move on. Verse number 4, whosoever committeth sin transgresseth. There we go again. Transgresseth. They ought not be allowed to put S's and TH's back to back like that. Transgresseth. So silly. Anyway, also the law. For sin is the transgression of the law, and ye know that it was manifested to take away our sins, and in Him is no sin. So, when John says, whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, what is he talking about here? When he talks about the law. Because I'm bringing this up because I know there's a group out there that uses this verse to prove their movement. It's called the Hebrew Roots Movement. Hebrew Roots Movement basically believes that you need to keep the Old Testament law. And I'm not talking about the moral law or that the judicial law of God is generally equitable. That's just general equity theonomist. That's me, by the way. Hi. Hebrew roots is that God's law, including the ceremonial law, like not eating shellfish, like keeping Sabbath, like keeping feast days, those are still on you. But John said, whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law. For sin, what is the definition of sin? Okay, here it is. It's transgressing the law. What's in the Old Testament law? Keep Sabbath. Keep these feast days. And you guys don't do that. So sin is transgressing the law. You're breaking the law. So that's sin. You need to keep Sabbath. Airtight proof, right? If that's a devastating rebuttal, we have a problem. No, it's not. Why? Well, first of all, that makes complete hash out of the rest of Scripture. When we talk about why was Passover, not just hey, they kept Passover, but what do you think Passover was for? I was talking to somebody about this last night. What do you think Passover was about? Jesus is giving them training wheels to teach them, hey, sin needs to be covered. And if it's not, the judgment is going to fall on you. And then they remember that every year with Passover, that the judgment of God fell on those who the blood was not applied to. There needed to be a sacrifice that covered their sin, or else judgment was falling on them, and they would bear the penalty of their sin. God was teaching them basic theology about how sin has to be dealt with. If you go ahead and represent the sacrifices now, you're saying the sacrifice of Christ wasn't final. It wasn't the last sacrifice. It wasn't the only sacrifice. We need more sacrifices. You're, in essence, denying the sufficiency of the sacrifice of Christ. There's a reason we don't keep the sacrifices. There's a reason we don't keep the Sabbath. Why? Because Paul says that Christ is our Sabbath. And he says in Colossians, don't let any man judge you about the observance of Sabbath. If you want to take a day off on Sabbath, go for it. Don't call Sunday Sabbath, because we're not. Sabbath means seventh. Sunday's the first. But you're not held to that. So, first of all, it makes a complete hash out of the rest of the New Testament. Clearly, the ceremonial law is not abrogated, but it is fulfilled. It wasn't evil or wrong or bad, but it has been used to its completion and it led to Christ. The rest of the law is still there. Moral law, thou shalt not kill. Still binding thing. And what God says is just as far as the judicial system is still binding today too. I think that if we say God's justice system required this penalty, and then America says, nah, just throw him in jail for a couple of years. And God said do something else, that's unjust. Because here's the standard of justice. So there is a right weight we should give to the law. But it's not what they're giving. And this is the text they're going to go to. And you say, but hang on. This verse says, sin is the transgression of the law. What other law do you think he's talking about? I'm going to say law, right? Actually, no. You remember what we went through in chapter 2? In chapter 2, we have verses 7 through 10 where it says, brethren, I write no new commandment unto you, but an old commandment which ye had from the beginning, the old commandment which is the word which ye have heard from the beginning, again, a new commandment I read unto you, which things true in him and in you, because the darkness is past and the true light now shineth. He that saith he is in the light and hateth his brother is in darkness even until now. He that loveth his brother abideth in the light, and there is no occasion of stumbling in him. So what do we say the commandment was? Love your brother. And we said we could also tie it even to walking in his commandments, but as we saw, love God, love your brother, that's a summary of that. But the commandment John has in view in chapter 2 is love your brother. Love God, love your brother. Because he goes on, love the world, neither things in the world. If a man love the world, the love of the Father is not in. So love God, love your neighbor. How about chapter 3? Because we're in chapter 3, right? What's the commandment John's going to be talking about in chapter 3? How about verse 23? And this is the commandment, that we should believe on the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, as he gave us commandment. How about chapter 4, verse 7? Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. Chapter 4, verse 11. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. 4 verse 21. And this commandment have we from him, that he who loveth God loveth his brother also. What do you think the commandment is in mind for John here? I don't think the law here he's talking about is the Mosaic law. He has a very specific command he is zooming in on here. And when he says, sin is transgression of the law, I think he's saying, sin